Mysterious ancient stone structures are scattered across the British Isles. Hill forts, dolmens, stone rows, and stone circles can be found in every region of the land. The identity of the builders of these megaliths are lost in the fog of Britain's prehistory. Some believe that Druids or other religious groups erected the standing stones for ritualistic purposes. Other views on the origin of these configurations point to astronomical arrangements that could have functioned as seasonal calendars in stone. Certainly, the builders of these stone monuments would have been immigrants settling in the Isles after the last Ice Age, as we have discussed in the previous section. Interestingly, the Cayce readings do provide some information on ancient stone structures in Britain that ties in with another deep mystery, the lost tribes of Israel. However, we need to review a bit of Hebrew history to grasp Cayce's connection of lost tribes and stone circles. Although the biblical Hebrews began as 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Jacob, around 926 BC, the kingdom split in two with 10 tribes in the north, the house of Israel, and 2 in the south, the house of Judah. Then about 720 BC, Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, deporting the Israelis to other lands in the Assyrian Empire. Whether all of the defeated Israelis were assimilated into the Assyrian Empire, or some managed to escape or migrate, is a matter of contention. Regardless, the 10 northern tribes lost their identity and disappeared from history. These are the lost tribes of Israel. To be sure, there have been theories put forth to identify the lost tribes with peoples virtually around the globe. One of the most amazing conjectures placed the lost tribes in Europe, including Britain. Fittingly, this theory is sometimes called British Israelism or Anglo-Israelism. While widely disregarded by modern scholars who cite genetic, linguistic, and historical evidence that contradicts the theory, adherents to British Israelism hold to the belief that the modern descendants of the lost tribes now populate Europe and America, fulfilling biblical prophecy. I wanted at least to mention the British Israelism model to set the stage for Cayce's explanation. Cayce did mention the lost tribes of Israel in several of his psychic readings. In contrast to British Israelism, which posits an overland route for the escaping Israelis, Cayce's readings state that they used ships to leave their homeland. Furthermore, in addition to settlements in Britain, some of the remnants of the lost tribes traversed the seas, eventually settling in the Americas. But that is another story entirely. For our present purposes, we shall focus on the groups of Hebrew voyagers who settled in the south of England, where they created stone altars for worship. Cayce's readings add one more wrinkle in the story of the Hebrew migrations to Western lands. The migration was not just the 10 northern tribes escaping the Assyrians in about 720 BC. The readings also describe other migrations from the southern tribes during the siege of Jerusalem during the reign of Hezekiah. Then again later during the reign of Zedekiah, when Jerusalem was attacked and eventually fell with many Hebrews taken into captivity in Babylon. Thus, from the Cayce perspective, there were multiple migrations from out of Palestine in reaction to the invasions during the reigns of kings Hezekiah and Zedekiah, in which some of the Hebrews escaped in ships and settled in other lands. The idea that some of the lost tribes of Israel could have included refugees who escaped Palestine by boat and migrated to distant locations certainly does stretch the imagination. Let's consider a couple of specific possibilities with regard to the logistics of such an exodus. One explanation could be that Phoenician sailors, operating in relatively close proximity, transported the Hebrew passengers as part of their regular trade activity. For example, Phoenicians living in the city-states of Tyre and Sidon would have been in contact with the northern Hebrew tribes of that region. The ancient Phoenicians were renowned for their extensive travels that may have well included the productive tin mines of what is now Cornwall on the south coast of England. Tin was a valuable and essential ingredient in the production of bronze during that era. Some scholars are convinced that Phoenician trade routes extended to the British Isles in pursuit of Cornish tin. Thus, the Hebrews could have simply paid fair for transport. This hypothesis also provides for regular communication between the Hebrew refugees in distant lands and the homeland in Palestine. And of course, this option allows for multiple migrations as the need arose. The Phoenicians, who may have called themselves Canaanites in ancient times, were apparently closely connected to the Hebrews. For example, King Hiram of Tyre helped David build his palace, and also sent cedars of Lebanon for the construction of Solomon's temple. It is likely that the chief architect and the master workers for Solomon's temple were themselves from Tyre. Solomon reciprocated by transferring control of the Galilean district of Kabul to Hiram, providing much-needed agricultural resources for that Phoenician city-state. There was regular commerce between the kingdoms, and the two kings joined to create a large merchant fleet manned by Phoenician sailors. With regard to religion, the Phoenician Canaanites worshipped Baal and had a strong influence on the practice of religion amongst the various Hebrew tribes at certain periods, which was very problematic for some of the Hebrew prophets. The point is that economic, political, and religious relations between the Israelites and the Phoenicians could be very close. Enlisting the services of Phoenician sailors for transport to Britain would have been a rather simple, straightforward business transaction between neighboring peoples with a history of cooperation. A second hypothesis is that the Hebrews themselves were accomplished seafarers capable of long-distance voyages. Some of the Hebrew tribes inhabited cities along the eastern Mediterranean shores and may have been competent sailors. In particular, the tribe of Dan is thought to have been a sea people. The Song of Deborah in the Book of Judges links Dan with ships and sailing. Furthermore, some scholars have associated the tribe of Dan with the Denyen Sea people. Interestingly, two of the Cayce readings given for individuals who are said to have made the voyage to Britain as part of the Lost Tribe migration were linked to the tribe of Dan. One individual was said to have possessed mathematical and nautical skills in the 20th century that traced back to the Hebrew incarnation associated with Britain. In another reading given for an individual who was said to have been descended from the Naphtali tribe of Hebrews who migrated as part of the Lost Tribes experience, the eventual destination was Samoa in the South Pacific. This individual was also cited for exceptional ability for the understanding of nautical activities. So it would appear that some of the Hebrews living in Palestine during the breaking up and disappearance of the 10 tribes of Israel may have possessed significant seafaring capabilities. Whether by cooperation with their Phoenician neighbors or entirely on their own, or some other scenario, the Cayce readings insist that some Hebrews were motivated to migrate and settle in the distant land we now call Britain. Let's focus on some of the individual stories of lost tribes and sacred stones. Now that we have set the stage for Cayce's account of Hebrew voyagers and sacred stones in Britain, let us consider some of the reincarnational characters of the story. Cayce gave readings for 13 individuals that discussed past lives as Hebrew voyagers who escaped their native land and settled in the British Isles. One of the readings was for a 6-year-old girl who was told that she had lived as Zelka, a Hebrew woman who had escaped the Holy Land by ship during the reign of Zedekiah, when Nebuchadnezzar's forces overran the land. Zelka had been a granddaughter of King Zedekiah. She traveled with a group of refugees who settled in what is now Ireland. Due to the physical hardships of that experience, she developed a hardiness accustomed to outdoor living. She was told that in her present life, it would be well for her to be out of doors and participate in athletics of every nature, especially during her teenage years. Except for this single reading describing the life of Zelka, all the other past lives of ancient Hebrew voyagers to the British Isles detailed experiences in what is now the south of England, near the present city of Salisbury and the adjacent county of Somerset. Considering the multiple migrations described in the readings, one of the earliest of the Hebrew migrants would have been an individual known as Zedekiah, although not the famous king. The Zedekiah described in a Cayce reading given in 1938 for a 67-year-old man was said to have been descended from those of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. In that experience as Zedekiah, the entity gained in its positive application of health, sanitation, and diets. Cayce pointed out that this emphasis on the vitality of the physical body is symbolic as well as practical, for the body is indeed the temple of the living God. The idea of worshiping in a temple would have been of enormous importance to the Hebrew voyagers who had done so in the Great Temple in Jerusalem. Several readings describe the way in which the Hebrew refugees adapted their religious customs in their new home. One of the individuals in the early periods of migration was named Zinbuan, a male incarnation of a 37-year-old woman who taught mathematics in the 20th century. Apparently, Zinbuan had been a mathematician and nautical director who helped in setting up stone circles as altars in Britain. This allowed the Hebrews to preserve the tenets and truths of their culture in their new homeland. In her present life, this woman was said to have carried over a love of adventure in strange places, in addition to her mathematical and nautical abilities. The construction of stone circles as altars is certainly evocative. Did the Hebrews merely adopt this technique, as they would certainly have noticed the abundance of stone circles in the region where they settled? Or did they bring that technique with them? The building of stone altars to represent the tabernacle in Jerusalem was cited in several readings as a primary activity of the Hebrew settlers in Britain. A 46-year-old woman was told that she had lived as Judith, a daughter of King Hezekiah, who fled from Judea to Britain. She was instrumental in the building of altars and the discarding of blood sacrifice, changing to the sacrifice of fruits. A 38-year-old Jewish interior decorator was told that he had lived as Jehu, one who, as a young lad, escaped from the Holy Land during the invasion of Nebuchadnezzar. His reading emphasized that the altars were built to convey the meaning of "the Lord thy God is one." As refugees from an invaded land, this thought had special significance. There would be no bondage or slavery amongst any people. A 56-year-old housewife received a reading that described a past life as Hezedes, a descendant of the priest of the Holy Land and a leader amongst those who fled the persecutions to set up altars in England, not for sacrifice, as had been done before, but rather to worship their deity. With regard to the precise location of the Hebrew settlements, 2 geographic markers were provided by the entranced Cayce. Salisbury, widely recognized for its close proximity to Stonehenge, was mentioned in 2 readings that discussed Hebrew settlements in Britain. A 57-year-old housewife was told that she had lived as Elamasiah, a granddaughter of King Hezekiah, who was among those who set sail to escape servitude in the Persian land. Near to what is now known as Salisbury, altars were built to establish a seat of customs and carry on the temple traditions of the homeland. A 36-year-old woman received a reading that described a past life as Myra, one who escaped by ship and settled near to what is now Salisbury, where altars were built to represent the dedications of individuals to service of a living God. In close proximity to Salisbury, Somerset, a county in the south of England, was cited in 2 readings as the eventual destination for Hebrew refugees. A 19-year-old woman received a reading that mentioned Somerset as a place where the children of Israel and the daughters of Hezekiah settled after departing their Middle Eastern homeland. As Ruth, she helped children to care for themselves and assisted in making better homes and family life for those in her community. She was encouraged to carry on this pattern in her present life. A 56-year-old woman had lived as Puella, a refugee among those who came from the Temple Watch in Jerusalem to the area in and around Somerset. Following the pattern of the tabernacle, she helped establish the outer courts of the temple, or that portion dealing with individual service and activity. Her reading noted that the altars built by the Hebrews had long since been torn away, yet there still exists evidence of the form of the tabernacle with inner and outer courts. Interestingly, her reading also noted a past life preceding this one in which she had been a woman named Judith, who was among the Hebrews who fled Egypt and settled in the Holy Land. Thus, the pattern of being a religious refugee seeking freedom in a new land was a soul pattern for this entity. The obvious question that arises in many minds when thinking about stone structures in the vicinity of Salisbury, England, is whether Stonehenge is being referenced. Let's be clear about this. Edgar Cayce did not mention Stonehenge by name, although others have insinuated that connection. According to mainstream archaeology, Stonehenge was completed at least 1,000 years prior to the Hebrew migrations cited in the readings. Any Hebrews in that area would certainly have been aware of Stonehenge and may have used it in some manner. Also, the readings say that the stoneworks constructed by the early Hebrews were destroyed, so it was not Stonehenge. It is also important to keep in mind that there are many ancient stone structures in that area, particularly a little to the north within the same county of Wiltshire, where there is the famous Avebury Circle and other nearby ancient structures. Furthermore, to the west in the county of Somerset, there are numerous stone monuments, including the Stanton Drew Stone Circle. In the broader scheme of things, it is unclear whether such psychic information has any historical value apart from whatever benefit may have been derived by the recipients of the readings themselves in terms of personal history. After all, that was the purpose for which Cayce provided the information. Yet many even today may find the information relevant in some manner, whether in resonance with the concept as a metaphysical proposition, or perhaps actual past life remembrances in this setting. With regard to academic studies and archaeological research, it may be worthwhile to keep an open mind with regard to artifacts and ancient structures, particularly in the specific counties of Wiltshire and Somerset. If scholars should encounter some anomalous facts that don't fit the mainstream version of prehistory in Britain, perhaps such ideas may yet have a broader interest for those seeking to understand the reincarnational history of Britain. With a broader perspective, there may come a greater appreciation that in ancient times, oceans were not barriers between continents. Rather, they were highways that facilitated travel between major landmasses. Such interpretations would certainly reinforce the Cayce perspective, which insists that ancient peoples were much more advanced and more mobile than is generally accepted by mainstream scholars.